We'll go to members, and we will start with Pauline Tully.
Thank you, Chairperson. Well, today I'd like to welcome our guest speakers here and thank them for attending to answer questions around accessibility for people with disabilities on the various transport systems in Ireland. I have a number of questions and points I want to make, and then I'll give over to yourselves for answers. Like, this committee is tasked with ensuring the implementation of the UN CRPD, which means that people with disabilities must be treated as equal citizens in our community. And in order for citizens to experience freedom and independence, accessible transport is of the utmost importance. And you, as the bodies with the oversight for our transport systems in this country, have an obligation to ensure inclusion on all our transport systems. But access is still a huge problem. And I mean, I'm talking about wheelchair accessible stops, poor infrastructure in urban areas. You have insufficient wheelchair places on our buses. The lifts at stations are frequently not working. There's a lack of changing places, toilets. Wheelchair users have to book trains hours in advance of using them. So there's a lot of issues still there. Now, I think the provision of services would be much improved if there was a proper consultation process with people with disabilities and disabled persons organisations. And it should be meaningful, that consultation, and not just a box-ticking exercise. I mean, where people are asked for input about project designs, but then those opinions are taken on board and not just ignored. So my first question is, how many board members do you have with a lived experience of disability? Because it was an initiative by the Minister for Transport, Tourism and Sport in the last government to appoint people with disabilities to the boards of each of the public transport agencies as a means of driving continuous quality improvement in our sector. And I'm just wondering, did that happen? My second question is, how many members of your design teams have a lived experience of disability? Because I think that would be very important on an ongoing basis, so you have constant consultation on different projects. In particular, to the National Transport Authority, I'm asking, why are yellow bus stop poles being replaced with steel poles, despite a recommendation from the NCBI to the contrary? Steel poles would be difficult for any of us to see against the background of the built environment, but particularly for people with visual impairment, it would be impossible. On the local link services, I'm told that they're refusing to accept people with disabilities without a carer. I mean, that's contrary to independence. Not all people with disabilities need or have a carer. So they should have the ability to board a bus without having to have an assistant with them. And I'm told that individual pickups are not carried out as well for people with disabilities by the local link services. Also, in many changing places, toilet facilities are provided in bus and train stations throughout the country because there is a lack of changing places toilets in the country as a whole. But I'm just wondering how many are in public places such as stations. And I have also concerns about cycle lanes, and particularly for people with visual impairments, that again, it's not often taken into account where they're placed. As we know, bicycles are silent, and if something can be done for people with visual impairments in that line. Now, I'm conscious I've asked a lot of questions there with a limited amount of time, but I'm sure some of my colleagues will be bringing up some of those issues again. But I'd appreciate your answers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we'll go to...
Perhaps I'll start, since I think a lot of them are directed at the NTA. Many board members have lived an experience of dealing with disabilities. I can't, in terms of visible disabilities, we had one board member was appointed by the last minister who was visually impaired. He resigned to take up a post in the government sector back a number of months ago, and his vacancy his post still has to be filled. So he was part of the NTA board up until his resignation, and his vacancy is filled now. In terms of members of design team who have the same type of experiences, it's not possible for me to say that. So, for instance, on Bus Connects Dublin, there are literally hundreds of people working on it, and I cannot, in lots of countries as well, and I cannot say that X number is fall into that category or not. And it's the same with the Metrolink project, which actually also has, hundreds of people working that project also. I certainly wouldn't have the information to say how many of them fall into that category. In terms of bus stops, it's frequently stated that we're replacing yellow poles with grey poles, but people omit to say some of the other factors in that. At the moment, most of the bus stops around the country actually are very poor in terms of giving information to users. If you look at most of the bus stops in your area, I'm pretty sure they won't have any information on the head of the pole telling you what bus stops there. So if you don't know, if you don't know about the service, you don't know where it's going. It's not a very useful stop at the moment. Most of them do not have information carousels on them, giving information on the timetables of the bus and the routings that they go. So the program we're engaged on now is to actually roll out better bus stops, which gives a lot more information to a lot more people. And in terms of, there are about 12,000 bus stops across the country. They've not been very well maintained over the last number of decades, and you will know that there's rusted poles and poles bent over in various places. So what we've gone for is a stainless steel type pole, which is low maintenance, but we recognise the need for visibility to visually impaired. So we put a very large flag at the top of the pole. By flag I mean a sign, which is 400 millimetres wide by over, depending on the number of routes at the top, can be over a metre deep. And that flag, which is at the top of the pole, is a yellow, mainly a yellow flag, a yellow and green flag, which provides a large amount of visibility just from that. In addition, the carousel, which is the circular thing in the centre of the poles, they were always supplied with black carousels. So we asked the manufacturer to give us yellow carousels. So all the carousels we were putting in place at these poles, which are about, I think those carousels are about 800 metres long along central poles, they're made out of yellow plastic to make them more visible. So I think on the bus stops, we've tried to balance the various competing demands between providing information to everybody, providing yellow parts of the apparatus, i.e. the flags and the carousels, and ultimately trying to provide information to users, because at the moment a lot of bus stops that's just not available. On your question about local link services not accepting people with some people with disabilities without a helper, I think I'd like to check that one out before I give you a response. So I think if it's okay, we'll write back to the committee on that. I'm not clear on that particular one. In terms of changing places, the larger type of toilet facilities, we have recently opened with Irish Rail one in Connolly Station, and the intention is more will get rolled out as refurbishments happen. So the next place that's planned is Houston Station, and obviously that's a big destination hub, and Waterford Station is the third one from memory. So those things are happening. On cycle lanes and the concerns about people with visual impairments, I think probably what you're referring to is bus stops there, and how cycle lanes get around bus stops and how the visually impaired are dealt with. And we've had several conversations with disability groups in relation to this, several conversations with cyclists in relation to this, and we're trying to come, and it's clear there's no perfect way of merging cyclists and pedestrians at bus stops. We're having to balance various competing demands, but where crossing of cycle tracks are required at busy bus stops, we are examining, can we put in a signalisation arrangement there for visually impaired that would provide an audible signal, as well as a red light for the cyclist to stop at that cycle track. So we are exploring whether we can and should do that at the various places where there's significant pedestrian movement across the cycle tracks. And in terms of consultation, which you mentioned there, we do a lot of consultation that do involve the disability groups, and we do exactly what you suggested there. You know, it's not a tick box exercise for us. We do take on board feedback. We do make changes. We're not able to satisfy everybody all of the time, but that's not unusual. I hope I answered all the questions there. If I missed any, by all means, let me know.
Peter? Okay.
Yeah. I think a lot of the questions were relating to buses and trains. So from a Lewis perspective, I hope in my opening statement, I've given a clear indication of the level of engagement that we do have with disability organisations, and we do believe we take it very seriously. In terms of the number of board members with a disability, we have one board member of 10 board members who is visually impaired. In terms of the design teams, I'd echo what Hugh has said about design teams. Many of the design teams working on projects are international design teams with several hundred people working on Metrolink. and I don't know how many people would be have a lived experience of disability, but within TII and TII staff, we do conduct a census every year, and so it's a self-declaration, and it is just above 4%, so about 12 people of staff of 280 have a self-declared lived experience of disability. And
Okay,
I
thank
hope
you.
that's answered any of the questions I can.
Okay.